Know that a time of great tribulation approaches, such as has not been seen since the beginning of the world, nor shall there ever be again. But our Lord will return to retrieve those that follow him from the wrath that will be poured out upon all who are living on the face of the earth. A time of worldwide wars, famines, great earthquakes, and sickness that will bring an abundance of death. The oceans will rage, and the land will burn, as the moon becomes as blood, and the sun black as sackcloth. But I warn you, before that terrible day, there will be a great falling away from the faith. And when the hour of judgment comes upon this fallen world, few will remain that truly believe. Though the convergence of signs for his return have been revealed to you throughout the scriptures, there are some mysteries that God proclaims will be sealed until the time of the end. Understanding that will be unveiled to the generation that will witness the return of the Messiah. I fear, though, that when the Savior returns, will he find any faith left on the earth?
It's been 2,000 years since the final prophecies were recorded. And today, the foundation for the convergence of nearly every prophetic sign foretold within the remaining biblical prophecies has never been more prominent. As a result, a recent rise in debates regarding the signs of the times has led to growing division regarding when the Messiah will return. After all, if the events prophesied within the ancient records are indeed to come to pass, then knowing the timing of the Lord's return would be of great importance.
The timing is a real hot button, especially among religious people, Christians, and what the like. We love predictability. We want to know when he's going to be coming back.
The conflict, the disagreement, the contention over the timing of the rapture, and particularly in the last 10 years, it has gone off the chart.
You know, instead of saying, my, how they love one another, as they said of the early church, now today of the church, they say, my, how they fight with one another.
And recent findings from organizations such as Lifeway Research confirm that the infighting among Christians is deepening.
In one of our surveys, we asked when they thought the rapture would occur. The largest group, 36%, believed that the rapture will occur pre-tribulation. But if that's the largest group, that means there's not a majority believing any one thing about the rapture.
In addition to the 36% that believe the rapture will occur before the tribulation period begins, 4% of Christians believe it will happen in the middle. 18% believe the rapture will happen at the end. An additional 13% consist of other timing variations and theories. 4% just aren't sure about any of it. And surprisingly, the remaining 25%, a growing statistic, no longer believe in a literal rapture at all. But why is this happening?
People
have access to a lot of information right at their fingertips. So they want to go and develop their ideas on their own. They want to put together this cornucopia of eschatological beliefs without any kind of hermeneutical framework. But it really may not match up with any views out there.
So while the debate rages on regarding the signs of the times,
some Christians believe this is the final sign for Christ's return as Russia occupies war-torn Syria. Israel prepares for war as they send troops to the border.
the secular world, which makes up most of the global population, couldn't care less about the return of Jesus, scoffing at what is perceived as nothing more than unfounded biblical nonsense.
It's helping to drive people away. At first, it's going to drive them away from the topic we're talking about, but ultimately, it will drive people away from the church, from Christianity, from pursuing the faith. That's how serious this is.
Yeah, I'm sure that somebody that has not bought into the teachings of Jesus Christ, scratch their head a little bit. If something this important about Jesus returning, Christians can't even explain how that's going to happen.
No.
After all, if the validity of biblical prophecy can be confirmed by historical discoveries, then why can't most Christians get on the same page when it comes to the return of their Messiah? Maybe this is because we're asking the wrong question.
There is so much infighting about when Jesus is coming back. Nobody stopped and asked why.
But the fact is, the timing is not nearly as important as the why of his return. People forget to even ask, why is Jesus coming back? Why is all this going to happen? Why must there be an end to the world?
And I think we're focusing on the wrong thing. The issue is, why does the rapture have to happen? What's the point to it all?
So, what is the point? Are the events of the end times simply a sequence of ancient superstitions? Or do those that were with Christ understand something much greater that was buried by the sands of time? Before our story can begin, we need to first understand that Jesus wasn't simply a Jew. More specifically, he was a Galilean. Not only that, but Jesus' disciples were all Galileans as well.
They were not only Galileans, they were Galileans from just about every walk of life. You've got a guy who's a fisherman, you've got a guy who's a tax collector, and yet Jesus assembled these Galileans together. And I think there's a great reason why the Galileans being present, his disciples, future apostles, would be spoken to by Christ in the Galilean vernacular.
You see, even though the regions throughout ancient Israel shared the same culture, the Galileans developed customs that were unique only to them. Why is this important? Because Jesus used people's cultures to more deeply communicate the spiritual nature of God.
He used words and symbols and analogies and parables for them to understand.
You see it on the Sermon on the Mount, speaking to them in ways that they can understand. Speaking to them about being fishers of men, for example. Why would you use that analogy unless you knew that these are fishermen? Everything he said was based on life that he lived, culture that he belonged to. I think it's hard for us to understand in our day what it was like for them in their day. When Jesus spoke, it was from the heart to their heart. There was a profound connection made.
The first century believers had such a clear understanding of what Jesus was saying. He gave them clear revelation.
So, it's no wonder that one day his disciples came to him to ask about the fulfillment of God's plan for the future. And Jesus answered them in shocking detail.
And he uses illustrations that they can understand that tells them the world is going to come to an end someday. And here's how it's going to happen.
So, to fully understand the depths of what Jesus could have revealed to the Galileans regarding how and why he would return in the last days, we must understand the unique culture to whom he was speaking. We need to see the Messiah through their eyes. This sparked an ambitious research project, and fragments of new insight began to expose the forgotten ways of the ancient Galileans.
You know that 2/3 of the gospel took place in a little strip of land by the Sea of Galilee. 2/3 of the gospel. It actually makes no sense. You really think about it. Most of the Jews didn't live there, but yet 2/3 of the gospel took place right there. So you cannot ignore the culture and the people, the life and the habits of those days. And that's why the Galileans are playing such a big part.
There are a lot of other people who have a lot of pieces to the puzzle, and a lot of other people are working on the same projects. It's an enormous research project to make sure that you find it and get it right, because there were so many people bringing up little bits and pieces of this. I'm thinking, there's got to be a pattern here.
And there was. Pieces to a puzzle that formed a prophetic timeline woven throughout the ancient scriptures that directly references an ancient Galilean ceremony, a ceremony that was passed on through generations to foretell how and why Christ will return in the last days of the world. And of all the ancient ceremonies this secret could have been hiding, it was discovered within a one-of-a-kind wedding. A wedding that contains a series of customs that would unfold over an entire year, revealing a chronological sequence of events that perfectly aligns with the recorded biblical prophecies leading to the second coming of Christ.
It's a wedding. It is a Galilean-style wedding. There's no doubt about it.
Why use a Galilean wedding? Because all of his disciples were Galileans. When Jesus taught his disciples, he used an object to start with that they already knew. Then he would say, the kingdom of heaven is like that. In the case of the Galilean wedding, he would say to the guys, you know what our weddings are like, don't you? We do them all the time. The end of the world is going to be like that.
The parallels to the rapture are incredible, and it is so brilliant. It's so brilliant.
So what exactly about their ancient wedding changes everything that we thought we knew about the second coming? To truly understand the depth of what we're only now rediscovering, we must journey back to ancient Galilee during the time of Christ to follow the very sequence of events that was hidden within their prophetic wedding. This is where the story begins.
These are the Galileans, and this is what they knew.
Welcome to the town of Cana. Israel's now under Roman control, ruled by Tiberius Caesar, and under his cruel authority, life is harsh for many of the Jews. But on this day, there's hope for the future. A promise for a new beginning. Because on this day, the betrothal between a young groom and his bride is taking place.
I don't think it's possible to overstate how important a wedding is in the Middle Eastern culture today, as it was in that day, the first century. A wedding was the most important event that would take place in any town for anyone.
In fact, as word spread throughout the streets that a betrothal was taking place, everyone who was able would rush to the main gate to witness it.
Everything took place at the gate, and this was really, really important because this is where you found the elders. The elders ratified legal agreements, and if you held the ceremonies near the gate, you would have layers of people that would gather around who are maybe not family members, maybe not friends. So you see, having wedding guests the way we have them today wasn't important to them. They wanted witnesses because you can't make a covenant without having witnesses to ratify the covenant.
There is a written proposal that is presented. It is a written covenant of marriage that the bride accepts.
They would be asked, do you agree on these terms? They would say, we do, which means that they can't go back on it. They can't say, I didn't know that was in there, or those terms were disagreeable to me.
After the agreement outlining the union between the two families was publicly read, gifts were then exchanged, with the most extravagant going to the bride. In fact, contrary to popular belief, a dowry, or the price that was paid to the bride's father in Galilee, was not a purchase of the bride as property as it was with surrounding cultures in the Middle East, but rather an insurance policy that would help take care of her if anything were to happen to her beloved. But what comes next will set in motion a sequence of events that will shape the future for generations to come.
Then it focuses down onto the moment where everyone holds their breath. What happens is the bridegroom is then handed a pitcher of wine.
The groom then pours wine into a ceremonial cup that will be offered to his desired bride-to-be.
And it was called the cup of joy. With both hands reverently and respectfully and fearfully, he would pass it to his bride.
When the groom presents the cup, she now has the choice as to whether or not she will accept or reject this proposal for marriage.
The moment the cup is handed to the bride, she's given all power to stop the wedding by pushing the cup back and rejecting the bridegroom.
Contrary to all other wedding customs in the Middle East, the bride in the Galilean wedding possessed the final authority. She alone had the power to accept or reject the offer from the groom. The betrothal could not be completed without her willing acceptance to drink from the cup of wine. But on this day, during this betrothal, the bride accepts. The groom will then also take and drink from the cup, solidifying the new covenant. But then he says something truly profound.
Then the bridegroom says publicly, so everyone can hear, you are now consecrated to me by the laws of Moses, and I will not drink of this cup again until I drink it anew with you in my Father's house.
But to understand why this phrase is so profound, we must look at another act recorded later in the scriptures. During the Last Supper, Jesus offered a cup of wine to his disciples to signify a new covenant with them. And after his disciples drank from the cup, Jesus then said something similar to what a Galilean would have heard from their own weddings. He said,
But I say to you, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom.
This is exactly why when he gave them the cup, he actually says, this is the new covenant in my blood. I'm about to pour my blood. It's a promise. We're going to be together again, and we're going to mark it by drinking the wine. It's something important.
The breaking of bread and offering of wine. These acts were to form a new union, a new promise, meant to deliberately set in motion events of unimaginable importance.
In my Arab culture, you eat from the same bread and you drink from the same cup. The thought is that that which is in you is in me. It is a common union, communion, no longer two, but one. When Jesus says that at that Last Supper, this is my body given for you, broken for you, he is talking as a bridegroom to his bride. When he says to them, this is the cup of my blood in the new covenant, that's how they would seal the betrothal in the ancient wedding.
Well, when you think about the Galilean disciples, they understood exactly what he was saying regarding these things. They were familiar things.
The illustration was entirely clear to them. When Jesus said that, his Galilean disciples at the Last Supper heard only one thing: wedding.
In fact, this might explain why later in the gospel records, the disciples asked Jesus only when the events of the last days would take place, and not why. Because as Galileans, they likely had already made the connection, especially given Jesus' first recorded miracle, which took place in the town of Cana, when he turned water into wine at a Galilean wedding.
And I find this most fascinating, that the first miracle Jesus ever performed was at a wedding. And that wedding had the same cultural dynamic that Jesus was describing when he was explaining to his disciples about his soon return.
But the conclusion of the betrothal was merely the first step on a years-long journey to an unimaginable conclusion.
Now the betrothal ceremony is finished, and the families, rejoicing, partying in the streets, go back to their houses. But this is just the beginning now of an entire year of preparations that goes into making the way for the wedding.
And though technically the bride and groom are now united as one under a new covenant, the real work only now begins. The groom must leave his betrothed, where they will live apart until the day of their wedding feast. In fact, the groom is now responsible for all of the preparations for the day he will be reunited with his bride. Over the following months, he will acquire materials to build a new room onto his father's house, along with crafting new furniture such as tables and stools. He'll negotiate for required items such as oil lamps, rugs, and dishes that will be used in the wedding feast that will take place in their new home. And scholars have now discovered that the theological implications of this period in the wedding held profound importance regarding the first coming of Christ. You see, before Jesus' crucifixion, he warned his disciples that he too would have to leave them. Jesus tells them,
I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also.
I'm going to prepare a place for you. This is key, especially when we think about the first century Galilean experience and culture. I'm going away. A Galilean would have understood that perfectly to mean that he's going to go away to prepare a new home. He's going to go prepare a place for his bride personally. And then Jesus said something that they all understood. I'm going to come back and get you, that where I am, there you may be also.
But then he's not leaving before he's making a verbal promise that he's about to come back and take us. And where he is, we will also be. And it's very important that we understand, he's not saying, so where you are, I will also be. It's where I am, you will also be.
He is speaking as a bridegroom to his bride, and they knew it. They knew it because this was the culture of that day. It is so tragic, for lack of a better word. They don't understand the profound depth of the culture. You cannot separate the culture from the Gospels. If you take the culture out of the Gospels, you virtually gut out the entire meaning of it.
But unlike the earthly custom where the groom will bring his bride back to his Father's house, Jesus was speaking in a heavenly realm where only those that are born again, having agreed to be his bride, could go.
It's Jesus who introduced the doctrine of the rapture to us. I'm going to come and pick you up, take you back where I've been. You gotta understand something. If you don't have that event taking place in your theology, you've got the wrong Jesus. If Jesus doesn't come back for his church, then we all have the wrong Jesus. He so has to come back that it's mandatory. It is absolutely a definitive event. It defines either we have the right Jesus or the wrong Jesus based upon the biblical Jesus coming back or not. He has to come back.
He said, I'm going away, but I'm going away to prepare a place for you. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to bring you to me. Well, hello, that sounds to me like a rapture.
And this is further reinforced by Christ himself when he tells his disciples that when this time comes, there will be those living on the earth that will not taste death. But until that time, when the groom can be reunited with his bride, there is much that needs to take place. And although the groom has left to prepare a new home, the bride's job is not yet over either. She must prepare for the hour that her groom will return for her.
The bride then takes the next year to put together a wedding dress and other accoutrements for the particular wedding. She's got to buy with her bridesmaids all kinds of pieces of cloth.
The bride and her bridesmaids would either weave or acquire fabrics for the bride's dress. Smaller towns in the region, being separated from more populated areas, may not have the materials readily available to complete an elaborate gown. The bride would often have to wait for traveling merchants that would sell what was needed. These preparations could become a difficult and costly task that in the first century could take months to complete. But that wasn't all. Even after the wedding gown was completed, the bride also needed to remain vigilant and pure as she waited for her groom, no matter how long it took.
The bride was to be always ready for her groom to come back and take her to that place that he had prepared for her. The bride would just not sit and wait. The bride was to occupy until her bridegroom came.
And this is where things get very interesting. Typically, in Galilee, around 1 year would pass while preparations were being made for the wedding feast at the Father's house. But recently uncovered evidence has exposed new insight that is sending shockwaves throughout the theological community. During this entire process to now, neither the groom nor the bride actually knew when the day or the hour of the wedding would take place.
The exact minute of the actual ceremony of the wedding was not known.
Yeah, the bride just did not know the day or the hour that her bridegroom was coming, so she always had to be ready.
In fact, no one in the entire town knew. No one, that is, except for one person.
No one knew the day or the hour of this wedding. Not the son, not anyone else. Only the father of the bridegroom.
Only the father of the groom knew the day and the hour that the wedding would take place. The one who read the conditions on behalf of his son during the betrothal. The one that provided payment to obtain a bride for his son. He, and he alone, holds the secret to when the wedding will take place, the hour that his son can retrieve his bride.
All the types of weddings in the regions, whether among Arabs, Jews, or other people, were all predictable. You would take a year to prepare for that wedding, but at the end of that year, the wedding would take place on a designated day. This is what made a Galilean wedding different than all the weddings in the area, because the bridegroom would finish building his room. He would finish with the feast, and then he would go to his father and say, "Father, I'm done. I want my bride." And the father would say, "I'll tell you when." For the Galileans, it was a surprise wedding.
The son would go home to the father's house, and in the Middle East they do this, but specifically you see this in the Galilee to this day, where the son adds on to the house. It's one portion built upon another, extending the home, enlarging the home. And so the father would have been the one with absolute preview over what's going on. It's the father who tells the son, "That's it, you're done." And then the father would give the announcement, "Son, go get your bride."
The father would be the one who would determine the day and the hour, and he would say to the groom, "Okay, now's the time. The day and the hour has come. The bridal chamber, that place that you've prepared, was complete." He would say, "Okay, now, this is the day, this is the hour, go get your bride."
This goes back now to several accounts in the Bible where Jesus tells his disciples that no one knows the day or the hour when I'm going to come. They wanted to know if he was going to establish the kingdom. And he says, no, you don't understand. No one knows when I'm going to come back for my bride. The only person that could send a bridegroom to get the bride was the Father. The only person that could send Jesus to come back to the earth is his Father.
You see, during Jesus' first coming, when his disciples asked when he would return at the end of days, he also told them,
"But of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father."
Jesus himself, I believe, demonstrated the genuine Galilean tradition by saying, not even the Son knows the day and the hour. At the moment of his promise to the disciples that he's coming to take them, at the moment of his description of the end, he was telling his disciples, no one knows the day or the hour.
But although Jesus himself says he will not know the exact time of his return, based on prophesied events that would take place at the end of days, the Gospels make it clear that we could know the approaching season in which the end of our age would take place.
The day is drawing near, so he's got to get the feast out. But still, he doesn't know the day when it's happening. He's got a lot of help putting it together because there could be 50 to 100 people attending this thing, and he's got to feed them not just for one day, but for several days. The bridegroom is finished with the feast. He's finished putting it together. He's got the room built. He calls upon his father to inspect it all, which is more of a formality. And the father finally says, "Yes, son, it's ready to go." The son says, "I want my bride." And the father says, I'll tell you when. But remember, this is a bridegroom who is waiting for the moment when his father taps him and says, go get her. He's excited, he's thrilled. And when Jesus is in heaven right now, wow, I can't even begin to picture what's going on. But he's got to be loving his bride, saying, I can't wait to come back and take you to be with me where I am.
And although the groom has now completed the preparations, he still has to wait for the moment that his father would tell him to go get his bride. And during this same time, the bride would also be prepared and waiting, equally as eager to be united forever with her beloved. But as the sun sets in the town this evening, the time of waiting is nearly finished. The darkness of night approaches. This brings us to a topic that's fiercely debated today. Since the origin of Christ's message left with the Galileans has faded into history, Jesus' statements regarding not knowing the day or the hour of his return has sparked heated debate and growing misconceptions.
And the church has suffered from this, and that is there are those who want to set dates. And yet the Bible teaches, both from Jesus himself and from the apostles, that no man knows the day or the hour.
It is my belief that these date setters, so-called, have irreversibly damaged Bible prophecy.
I grieve about the obsession of when will it happen as far as day and hour. When you start setting days and then it doesn't happen, then you have millions or hundreds of thousands of disappointed people that good chances that they'll walk away from that faith because it wasn't proved right.
And the result is that Bible prophecy is being systematically erased from Christianity all over the world.
I'm just so stunned. I never thought I would see this in my lifetime, that the greatest news in the Bible is now marginalized, jeopardized, and is simply coming under great criticism and skepticism. And then you talk to a pastor and he'll say, you know what? I don't want to be identified with the fringe. There is a fringe. We don't know the day or the hour, and we don't. Nobody's got any special insight. It's a secret. Apparently only God the Father knows.
Look, when you live in this world and suddenly someone tells you you're about to be taken physically out of this world, then knowing the day is like hitting the jackpot. However, it saddens me that even though Jesus himself said, no one knows the day and the hour, why do we think that we need to know? It sends a clear message. We're not supposed to deal with the actual date. We're supposed to deal with the preparation for that day.
In addition, with spreading misconceptions of biblical prophecy, more church-going Christians with each passing year no longer want to hear about these so-called fringe topics. And most churches have clearly recognized this trend.
And if you ask a pastor, he will tell you flat out, you know what? The world is coming to end is not going to grow my church. The fact that even Jesus coming back is not going to.
That is the number one reason, actually. And it's really because pastors are themselves ignorant concerning Bible prophecy. They're also fearful. They're fearful that if they start teaching Bible prophecy, I mean, really, they're teaching the Bible. So how can you not teach the Bible, the whole counsel of God, without also teaching prophecy by default? But they're fearful that it's going to be too controversial.
Christians always want to be accepted by the world. They are always on the run to adopt and embrace worldly views in order for people to like them. You sugarcoat everything. You become a motivational speaker rather than a pastor. Because if you come to an unbeliever and you pull up this Rapture card, he's going to run away from you. He's going to think you're crazy.
And this growing trend of marginalizing Bible prophecy is not merely an unfounded perception. It's proven to be happening, and likely far worse than you believe.
Let me take you to a more qualitative study we did several years ago. We took 450 of those sermons from different pastors and just took those as a sample and looked at those sermons. Only 2% of those were preached from a passage of scripture that would be a prophetic book of the Bible.
Here's why this is a problem. The culmination of prophetic events make up almost 1/3 of the entire Bible. The findings that on any given day, only 2% of sermons contained anything prophetic means that churches are intentionally marginalizing the topic.
I think that when you take 30% of the Bible and you ignore it, then your understanding of the other 70% is going to be flawed. The Bible cannot be dissected, and you cannot just choose what you want.
As to why it is that Christians today are dismissive of the Lord's return. I would connect the dots with biblical illiteracy. And here's the thing, I'm sad to say that it's the fault of the pastor behind the pulpit.
Churches are going to tell you, you know what? I want to live my full life. I want to see my children grow up. I want to see my I don't want to think about end of the world issues. And I think that is what so threw me, is that the fact that the King is coming, we have a glorious home prepared for us, we're going to go to that place eternally, became negative, became a downer.
But the bigger problem is that you cannot remove prophecy from the Bible without also removing the return of Christ.
I absolutely believe that the rapture is a fundamental belief in Christianity. Eschatology, Bible prophecy, is of paramount importance. Nearly 1/3 of the Bible is prophecy. So you cannot have the whole counsel of God without also having the prophetic word of God. It's the gospel. The gospel is that Jesus came, he was crucified, buried, rose again on the 3rd day, and is coming back again one day. If you take the return of Jesus Christ out of the gospel, you got the gospel out.
But even worse yet, the unintended result of prophecy being systematically removed from churches and educational institutes is that the world is forgetting why prophecy exists in the first place. It's so that God can prove to the world that he is God. The point to all of this is that if you remove prophecy from the Bible, you remove the proof that the Bible is from a divine source. It would place the remaining scriptures of the Bible on par with other religious teachings in the world. With all things perceived as equal, the Bible would be seen as no more relevant or divine than any other so-called holy book.
This is actually why it is that young people today want nothing to do with the church. That the number one reason that many today don't believe is because there's no evidence. You know what's interesting is Jesus said, I have told you what's going to happen before it happens, so when it happens, you will believe that I am. There is so much evidence, and the problem is that many today do not believe because they do not see the evidence that is there.
And only one thing could come from this: a falling away of those that believe Christ will return, and even in the validity of the Bible itself. A terrifying trend that has already begun.
So, my mother and father immigrated to America from the Middle East, and the America that they came to in 1963 is not the America today. It has changed dramatically. There was a day when there was this knowledge of the Lord's return. You talk about it today, and it almost reminds me of what Peter said about how that there is coming a day that they will mock and scoff any mention of the Lord's return. Where's the promise of his coming? They've been saying that for generations and generations, yet he does not come.
Well, I think that's all a part of the end time apostasy. Everything we're talking about, it was prophesied, it's happening. I think one of the things that plays into here is what the Bible calls the great falling away, the great fall from truth into apostasy.
And this is not simply a perceived social change from different generational perspectives, but one that is being exposed through findings from various organizations such as Lifeway Research, the Barna Group, and Pew Research.
We see that only about 15% are bought into evangelical teaching, indicating that Jesus Christ is the only way to remove their sin, and that Jesus Christ alone is how somebody can see eternal life, and that they ought to share that. More than 8 out of 10 Americans would have some hesitancy or maybe completely dismiss the core evangelical beliefs of putting the Bible first and believing in Christ alone.